Today, I will be talking about translation in the age of CX. For those of you who don't know what I mean by CX, I refer to customer experience, which is now a central theme among most global enterprises that really care about presenting an active and dynamic interaction mode with their customers in digital platforms. So what I will do in this presentation is talk about what CX is, why it matters, and also touch upon what we mean by global customer experience. And then I will focus mostly on how this impacts the tasks of translation in the global enterprise. And in the end, I'll close with some information on what CX-ready translation models look like. So today, we live in a world where there's 4.5 billion people online. This is more connection than has ever been possible in the history of man, as we know. Many of the people that have joined the internet, that have come into connectivity, are people that come from the emerging world, and probably the last 1.5 billion people were mostly coming into the internet through mobile technology. So mobile technology is now a very central element of how connectivity happens. The connection is often made through content. So when a company presents itself to its customers, it does this through content, information, data about itself, about what products it offers, and how to navigate the capabilities of these products. If we look back and see it, most of the leading and most successful brands and enterprises in the world today, customer experience is a very critical and core focus of what they do. This is a quote by Steve Jobs many years ago, where he says that you have to start with customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. I want to clarify that, firstly, that the pandemic has accelerated and dramatically expanded the need for global enterprises to be digitally present. And to also clarify that CX is not just about customer service. It's not just about customer surveys, and it's more than what begins at the point of sale or the after-sale experience. Customer experience is a continuous journey, and the emphasis is on continuous. It's an ongoing engagement, it's a relationship, and it begins from the first point of contact. So it's important to understand what we mean by digital presence. It's the kind of information that we interact with in the enterprise's digital presence, in digital footprint, and it involves all kinds of content that help you become aware of the product, from that first ad that you might see to the information that provides you some detail about what the product's capabilities are, to the information that lets you compare it to other products, all the way to the point where you say, okay, I want to buy this product. So it's that whole sequence of information that is presented to you is what is called the buyer journey, and it's a series of multiple digital interactions that enable you to understand the product, and all done through content. So content is the underlying foundation platform for establishing a relationship with the digital customer. So if you look at a business-to-business marketing organization's view of what they have to do, you'll see that most of the journey is digital, but that does not mean that there's never in-person or direct human interactions. In the business-to-business setting, there will need to be some human direct actions, but much of the journey, much of the customer's self-education, understanding of your products, of being able to compare it, with competitive products, begins with content that you provided. These can include white papers, case studies, videos, brochures, webinars, analyst reports, even external content from guys who just blog and tell you what they think about these different products. And so these are all delivered through different kinds of, from your own website, through webinar forums, perhaps, through online communities, and sometimes through your sales organization. And the journey is also very multi-channel based. So there are multiple digital formats that you have to work with. So it could be on a phone, it could be on a PC, it could be on a tablet, it could be in social media when you're just talking to people in Twitter or Facebook, where you share experiences about this product, about your experience with the product. Or it could also be, going directly to a store. So the nature of the interactions is what is now called omnichannel. There are many different points of contact. The used to be only like 15 just a few years ago, but now they're saying as many as 25 points of contact happen, digital points of contact, where you go in and out of your process, where, while you're living your life, you go and check out how this product, might impact what you want to do with it. And again, the pandemic has had a huge impact on how this affects you. McKinsey recently did a study, and they said that on average, the pandemic has accelerated the digitization of customer interactions by several years, 7 years across the globe, but in the Asia Pacific region, as much as 10 years. So you had already a climbing, trend where more and more digitization was happening, but the pandemic in a single year accomplished what would have normally taken 7 years or 10 years. So this is, quite dramatic. The more research that they've done also points out that now it is very clear that for most business-to-business enterprises, e-commerce is the most preferred way and the most preferred channel from all the channels that they offer. There's been a definite drop in the in-person contact, and this continues to drop. There will always be a need for it, but it continues to drop. And we also see that the use of video conferences has increased dramatically. And again, these are trends that have been accelerated by the pandemic. And we see today that omnichannel is a very key requirement in the business-to-business setting. We already know that this is true for how we, buy consumer products, but this is now increasingly true for the business-to-business setting. And again, McKinsey states that in their research, they found that business buyers will choose to walk away from those enterprises that don't offer a whole range of channels through which they can interact. So omnichannel is a requirement today, which is a means of building competitive advantage. And buyers are going to drop sellers who don't provide true omnichannel presence. So given all this change that we're seeing, how does this impact the translation, perspective? So basically, it changes what we translate, it changes why we translate, and it changes how we translate. So it's a pretty dramatic change for the translation world as well. And the primary focus of what we do now is to track, is the information we're providing, is the content that we're making available to our customers and to our potential buyers, is it improving their digital experience? Is it improving their ability to understand and assess our products and how it fits with their specific needs? So this means that it's a very different perspective from the localization of yesterday. Historically, localization has focused on relatively static content that had to be translated. So, you couldn't sell a toaster in Germany without a German user manual of some type, and you couldn't sell one in Brazil with a Brazilian Portuguese manual. So the historical focus has been on product manuals, some brochures, and a limited part of their web presence. And the volumes have been, in contrast to what happens with customer experience, have been relatively low. And the means of production, primarily human, post-editing, MT sometimes. But what the localization picture now is changing dramatically. The large volumes of global customer experience data that you need to be able to present means that there's a huge need for much more translation and much more rapid and dynamic translation. So if we look at what is happening, it's in terms of volumes, it's moved from millions to billions of words a year. And the range of content that you would have to translate is much greater in scope and intention. And it also varies in many other ways. So it can range from community and user-generated content. For most e-commerce sites, this is very critical. More and more important to provide lots of customer support content so that customers can self-serve and resolve problems without having to go and interact, over the phone or in person with the company. Much more internal work group sharing, product design, knowledge sharing, marketing and salespeople and product development people trying to understand, like, what do customers like about our products? What do they not like about our products? There is much more of a need to understand, what matters and what doesn't matter, and just communication in general. So this is not just internal emails and chat, but also ongoing day-to-day, minute-to-minute conversations with customers and the enterprise. And so translation is now moving into the heart and soul of every global enterprise. And it's focused on communication, collaboration, and understanding. So it's a different focus from our historical view of localization. And so, of course, because of the volumes, because of the rate at which this information comes, the sheer flow of this information, there has to be an expanding role of machine translation in the overall translation picture. And today we're looking at millions to billions of words a year, and is a very different picture from the historical localization view. So when we look at what the enterprise needs to translate and what they want to focus on, we can see that, localization, as you can see in the top left corner of this chart, is relatively high quality, but relatively low volume. But the highest return on investment in translation and the best customer experience outcomes are going to happen around customer support, around e-commerce, around social media analysis, and around communication in general. So it's where the volumes are in the range of hundreds of millions of words, if not billions, sometimes many billions of words. So we need to change the way we look at what we're doing. And translation production models that made sense for 1 million words a month don't make sense when many billions of words a month are needed. You have to make some changes. It is not physically possible to find the number of translators you need to translate billions of words into multiple languages. So a combination of expert human and expert machine translation has to come into play. And we see today more and more that the leading companies in the world, the ones that have the greatest brand image and brand recognition with their customers have the ability to share huge volumes of information, and using translation technologies that range from purely human to purely MT to something in between, where you work and optimize around the specific needs of the content. So one of the big changes that's happening is that the optimal translation production mode is beginning to vary. The use of rapidly improving MT is now a much more urgent requirement. And this is not generic MT like Google Translate. This is MT that is tuned to the enterprise's specific product domain, subject domain, that understands the terminology that you use, that understands the brand names, understands critical marketing messages that you want to do. And it's MT that responds and improves continuously. And there's a very tight collaborative feedback loop in the MT, so that when you're trying to translate billions of words, it's not possible to get all billion at a very high quality. It's a gradual climb. So there's this evolutionary aspect to it. And while the traditional localization, translate, edit, proof process still is, very valid and relevant, it focuses on a much smaller volumes of content where where that is necessary. And so the role of machine translation, tightly integrated with human feedback, is growing dramatically. So again, if you look at the kinds of tools that we use when we look at the quality and the volume requirements that we need to deal with, you find that for translation production processes that where human translation is the heart of what you do, where human translation is more than 90% of what you're doing, TM and translation management systems are very valid and relevant, tools that you need to be able to do this. But as you start increasing in volume, as the rate and the flow of data starts to expand, you find that the role of human translation drops as a percentage of the total input that goes into the translate words that are being translated. And adaptive, continuously improving MT systems are much more critical in this kind of setting. So to give you an example of what this means, we can look at a typical multilingual e-commerce website. So typically there'll be a product title, there'll be some sort of descriptive title that you search on, and that's how you find the product. And then there's a little more detail about the product, description that could be a page or two or more sometimes. And then there's a lot of feedback from customers who have purchased this product. And there's positive feedback, there's negative feedback, and this information is used by buyers to decide, okay, well, what do I think about this product? What do others think about this product? And it's very influential in helping a buyer decide whether they want to buy or not. There's also, for many kinds of products in the business to business setting, or even in the business to consumer setting, there often need to be buyer to seller communications, so that once you get to the point where you want to buy, you want to make sure that, okay, will it work with this kind of electricity? Will it, is it safe to use around children? Whatever these things are. And so there's all this dynamic user-generated content, user communication-related content that also is needed in the typical multilingual e-commerce scenario. And then, of course, there's all the legal stuff, transaction-related pricing, policies on return, and just details about how the order will be processed. And so when we look at this from the translation perspective, we can see that you can't apply the same translation process to all those elements. Some need much more human impact, much more human involvement, like anything to do with transaction-related pricing or liability, or or critical return policy related information that needs much more human involvement. And the huge volumes of user generated content cannot it cannot be done with huge human involvement, because the sheer volume and the rate at which that information is coming is just too, it's too fast to flow. It has to be done mostly with machine translation, but machine translation optimized around critical terms, optimized around the key term, the key expressions used in the reviews, to make sure that it's translated properly and helps international buyers. And then the product title and product description information, again, need a little more human input than the pure user generated content. So if we look across again at the sliding scale of from raw MT to expert human, you can see that the effort can change. There'll be, for the product title and the product description, you can use some fair amount of MT, but you still need lots of human guidance. For the global user reviews, buyer seller communications, maybe it's 99% machine translation, but there is that 1% of human input to make sure that it translates at a high enough quality level. And for critical legal liability, order management related stuff, you make sure that there's much more human involvement. So you produce content that is useful and that there's less chance of any misunderstanding there. So to add to the complexity of the sheer volume that we're dealing with here, you also have the fact that within the global enterprise, there's information coming from many different places, from email, from the web, from call centers, from the engineering department, from search, and from social media. And they need to also pull this information together into a common platform just to understand their own customers. So this adds additional complexity to the translation process, because the translation processes now need to connect into these new data platforms which bring together customer experience data. So as many companies understand that customer experience data is critical, they have to bring the data so that they have a unified view of the customer experience. And because of this, it is way beyond the scope of most of today's translation management systems. It's a much more complex, much more dynamic, much more active kind of framework that you need to work in. And what you see is that human-machine collaboration has to be much more streamlined, much more integrated, and much more efficient than most current MT post-editing processes are. And they need to focus on delivering content that is fit for purpose. So you're not looking for perfect translations. You're not doing like the MQM level translation error analysis. It needs to be useful in a time frame that is meaningful to the customer. And because of the flow, the rate of information that's coming through here, most current TM systems, probably all current TM systems, are not able to handle this. And it's because they were architected for historical translate, edit, proof processes, or historical PEMT challenges where every word was post-edited. So again, if we are to summarize what translation in the age of customer experience, how it's different, it's much faster. There's much more volume. There's much more complex integration with IT infrastructure and critical customer data. It's more embedded into work processes. And it's translation everywhere where there is a global or an international angle. And so it's much more pervasive. And this is one of the reasons why we see that there is much more discussion about things like language operations or translation operating systems, or just global data integration into corporate, core corporate IT. And again, the focus moves from simple localization of critical content to communication, collaboration, and understanding, and connection into these unified customer data platforms. If I can summarize one more time, we're looking at massively more volume, and this is a requirement to engage with the modern enterprise. Even small and medium-sized companies have dramatically more volume than they used to. It's at least 100 times more than it was 10 years ago, maybe even 1,000 times more for certain kinds of companies that are very focused on transactions happening in the digital space. It's much more sophisticated in terms of IT integration, linking into customer data platforms. It requires a much more robust and adaptable human-machine collaboration where you can slide the level of human to machine relationship as the content needs. And the big difference is that it's much more focused on communication, collaboration, and understanding. So quite a step forward in terms of what we have been doing in localization. But this also creates an opportunity because so far localization has been focused on the tip of the iceberg. And the future is very bright for the leaders who are able to adapt to these new needs and can change and learn how to build these much more integrated, much more sophisticated translation production models and address a bigger piece of the iceberg. And when you look at the total global experience, the potential is wonderful and quite, substantial. And that is the presentation. Thank you. You can find out more about the subject I've been talking about at the link on the blog here. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond either through Twitter or via my email. Thank you.